Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 169, Performing Medieval Theatre, a conversation with Kyle Thomas. For this guest episode, it's a welcome return to Kyle Thomas to the podcast. This is the second part of our conversation where we discussed Kyle's work on preparing 3 of the York Cycle plays for performance this summer in Toronto. As you will hear, Kyle is part of a team that are going to perform the 50-play cycle on the 7th of June 2025 in the grounds of the University of Toronto. For those of you in the Toronto area, I will give you all the details for that at the end of the podcast, and there are links in the show notes. Kyle A. Thomas is a theatre historian, a professional actor, a director, and a theatre critic. He recently left his position at Missouri State University after reinvigorating the BA Theatre program there, and now serves as adjunct professor of theatre at North Park University in Chicago, where he is also a resident ensemble member of Stage Left Theatre. A specialist in early modern theatre and drama, Kyle's publications reveal how performance shaped social and cultural practices in pre-modern Europe. His direction of medieval plays includes The Play of Adam at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Cloisters, New York City, in 2016. He's also the chief editor of the journal Romard, Research on Medieval and Renaissance Drama. You can watch him on screen as part of the Discovery Channel's Mysteries of the Abandoned, Hidden America, or as the Theatre History Professor on YouTube. It was great to catch up with Kyle and discuss some of the practicalities of performing medieval cycle plays. Once again, we were talking over Zoom, with Kyle deep in his preparations for the production.
So this is exciting. So I am working with North Park University in Chicago with a set of students and alumni to perform 3 plays that are from the York Mystery Plays cycle. The 3 plays are The Conspiracy. So this is the story of Annas and Caiaphas going to Pilate to try and convince him to arrest Jesus. Judas interrupts and says, "Hey, I'll give you all the evidence you need to arrest me." You have The Last Supper, which I think are all fairly familiar with, the final supper before Christ's passion begins. And then we're also doing The Harrowing of Hell, which is the most unique, I think, and interesting of all these pieces, where this apocryphal story of Christ going into hell between his death and his resurrection, where he rescues the faithful of the Old Testament to take them to be in heaven with God. And we are doing these as a part of a project with the University of Toronto and their Medieval Theatrical Society, PLS. And these will be performed. Our 3 plays will be part of the whole cycle. So all of the 40-something, almost 50 plays from medieval York that still exist today. We'll be performing them all in one day, 24 hours, on June 8th in Toronto at the University of Toronto, outside.
Yeah, so you're kind of promenading them?
We are going to do them on wagons. It is a bit of a promenade. So we will have 3 stations that are set up, and the plays will just cycle through those 3 stations, one by one, much in a similar way to the way they would have been done in medieval York. Of course, medieval York had several more stations than just 3, but yes, it will be kind of a bit of a test case for how well this works. But it is also something that has been done in the past. PLS and the University of Toronto did this, I want to say in the late 90s. I think it was 98 or 99 that they last did this. So we're looking at 25 plus years since the last chance they've had to perform all these plays. And what's really neat is that there's just so many different groups from all over North America coming together to both professional kind of theater type groups, as well as university and academic groups, that some of which are connected to theater, some of which are just kind of interested in the medieval world and medieval studies and medieval drama. We're all coming together in Toronto in early June to perform them.
And was there a fight over which plays you were going to produce, or was it all very amicable?
No, I think for the most part it was largely amicable. So the individual who's coordinating this is a great medieval scholar, medieval drama specialist, Matt Sergi. He's a friend of mine, a colleague of mine who I've known for several years. We've actually performed a few French medieval dramas in some earlier conferences several years ago. And one of the things he did when he first conceived of the project and got the green light for it, some funding for it, was reach out to the contacts he knew that would certainly be the first to sign on for this. And I was very lucky to be included within that group. And so for the handful of us that he first initially contacted, he also gave us the opportunity to choose the plays that we really wanted to do. I didn't have a lot of preference except for Harrowing. I really, really wanted to do Harrowing of Hell. And I think that that's because for me, as I read through the plays of the York mystery plays, I think they're all really lovely and a lot of fun. And there's a lot of kind of interesting aspects to them that are happening within these dramas and how they were written. But Harrowing to me kind of represents this really interesting, kind of almost cathartic or climactic moment within the entirety of this cycle. This is the moment of Christ triumphant, where previously we've kind of had, if you want to give it some kind of structure format overall, you have these Old Testament stories, which are largely about seeing or foreseeing, prophesying the coming of Messiah and the promise of salvation that Messiah brings with him. Then we get to kind of the middle section, which is about the nativity, this kind of this first climactic moment where Christ is born. And it's really beautiful and amazing. And we get some of his life and his miracles and what is his ministry on earth. And then we get to his death and we go through the horrors of his passion and his crucifixion. And then we kind of build to this point with the harrowing, that we've seen Christ kind of have this ministry, get beaten down within the tortures and horrors of his crucifixion. And then he emerges from all of that in this place where he quite literally tears down the walls of this keep. It's kind of described as like a medieval keep, this sense of like there are people behind this wall, and these demons, Beelzebub and Belial, and Satan himself are there monitoring the gate, and Christ comes forth and he just essentially speaks it down. And in doing so, actually gets into a debate with Satan, a really fun rhetorical back and forth. It's kind of throwing a few insults here and there, and Christ is above it all, and uses it as a way to speak to his position as the Son of God, as proof that he is the Messiah. And he's able to rescue Adam, Eve, and David, and Moses, and Isaiah, and these Old Testament figures. And he takes them with them to heaven. And in particular, harrowing happens not too far before we get to the final play, which is the Last Judgment, where people are divided between the faithful, the good Christians who were faithful and showed love and care for their fellow man and for God. They get to be brought into heaven, and it's this kind of glorious moment. And then, of course, we have the hellmouth, where everyone else is tossed into, and I think you've spoken to the kind of the fire and brimstone and the ashes and the smoke and such that would be utilized to really push the effect of this terrible hellmouth in this terrible place. And Christ is able to take all those faithful up with him, including those Old Testament faithful from harrowing, with him into heaven, whereas all the other sinners and evildoers are tossed into the hellmouth.
Yeah. So, of course, there's a polemic element to them, but they are hugely dramatic pieces, aren't they? I remember reading, I think it was The Harrowing of Hell, and you just think, on stage, people are enjoying getting dressed up as devils and doing funny and, slightly weird things to each other to represent that.
Yeah, and I think that there's an added kind of layer to that as well. It's not just the people enjoying doing it. Both, even today, because I'd like to think we're enjoying doing it, but also in the medieval world. But you also have that sense of the kind of civic nature of these plays, that, medieval York wasn't all that big. And that, if you imagine yourself in, say, 14th century York, and, you wake up on, around the time of the Corpus Christi, the Feast of Corpus Christi. So it's late May, early June. The weather's kind of nice. It's starting to get really warm. The flowers are out, and it's a really lovely day. You go into the city and you see, there's John, who I work with. I'm also an apprentice with them in the particular guild that we're a part of, or I know so and so. So there's very much this kind of community aspect to it, where you know the people who are performing these plays. You also know these people as laborers and as members of your community and as people you go to mass with. So it takes on this added layer of enjoyment because you see these individuals not only enjoying what they're doing, but you get to share in their kind of fun and silliness with it. I think the best example is the very, kind of comically macabre take on the crucifixion, which is done by the Pinners and the Joiners Guild. These are the structural engineers of their day. These are people who know how to put two pieces of wood together and make it stay together for decades. They're building houses and that sort of stuff. And yet, so you have these guys that are very skilled at what they do in terms of their labor, and they're playing the soldiers who are trying to put the cross up, and they can't get it to stay up, or they can't figure out how to put it up. And it's kind of like wild that this idea of a stuffy, stodgy medieval world where everybody is so deferential to the Christian sacredness. It's just, everything's sacred all the time. No, that's not the case. This is the crucifixion, and we're finding humor in the inability of what is represented as the soldiers at the foot of the cross, their inability to raise Christ up on the cross. And at the same time, these are also the kinds of people who know exactly how to do that in the medieval world in their actual work, and yet they seem to be unable to do it. So you're sitting there kind of laughing at this terribly macabre scene with Christ, who is in the midst of pain, torture, and death. And yet we're all kind of laughing at this inability to do the work of that death, of the work of the salvific history, but also the work of just the labor of putting two pieces of wood together and making them stand the way they're supposed to. So it's a very rich, dramatic collection. And there's such good kind of swings of funny and serious and sacred with, kind of tongue-in-cheek references as well, and all of that. So it's very, very well-written stuff that I think sometimes gets lost in the interpretation that it's all meant to be highly sacred because it deals with biblical stories and biblical figures. But I don't think that is it at all. I think there's moments where it's certainly given that weight and that gravity, that gravitas. But it is not always that. It is also meant to be an enjoyable, fun experience.
And is that what you're trying to bring to your three plays that you're doing particularly?
Yes. I think, I've been kind of conceiving of The Conspiracy as this kind of little police procedural drama that they're trying to figure out how to catch the criminal. Of course, the criminal is Jesus. Yeah, and you've got Annas and Caiaphas. Remember these Jewish figures who run the Sanhedrin. They're trying to convince the boss, which is Pilate. Maybe he's the precinct director. Whatever the term is for the kind of head of the police district, and they're trying to convince him. We need to arrest this Jesus. Here's the crimes he's done. This is what he's done. Here's how he's done it. And Pilate's kind of playing the political angle, like, well, maybe I shouldn't because it could cause a lot of trouble. And do we really know if he did these things? And then, of course, in the last hour, Judas comes knocking on the door and he's like, hey, guys, I got everything you need. I got all the evidence, and I'll even help you with the setup so you can catch him. And so I think it's really interesting to see it in that kind of format, that structural way, because if we look at it in that sense, then you can see the fun, you can see the humor, you can see these character relations that aren't always so apparent within the dialogue, because again, these are figures that would have been really familiar to people in the medieval world. They would have heard these stories and known these tales, and in some cases prayed to these people as a part of their everyday lives. And I think that it's important for us as kind of modern interpreters of the work to find our own personal connections into it that add another new layer. So we have the layers are, the story itself, which is biblical and theological, doctrinal. And then you have the medieval layer, which is about work and labor, civic, community, those aspects. And then we are adding this new layer on top of it, which is about our own connection through these contexts and what we see these plays and characters, how they are meaningful for us today. And so that's the work that we're really doing.
Right. Your actors don't have the privilege of being co-workers, I'm assuming, in that guild sense. So you probably just told me how you're making that accessible for your actors in that description you've just given us.
A little bit. It's tough. The challenge of medieval drama, and I'm saying I mean medieval drama broadly, not just the York Mystery Plays, but the challenge is that so much of that world, I think, as we've already talked about in our conversation, so much of that world is hard to parse out. It's hard to kind of get a on the ground picture of, but it's also hard to square that picture with the bird's eye view, which is much bigger and broader. And in all of that, we have to kind of understand a little bit about how these dramas work, how the dramatic world of these individuals, these playwrights and the audiences and the actors that would have originally performed them, how all of that was meant to function, the effect that it was supposed to have. It kind of takes a little bit of real research and scholarship to be able to tease some of that out. So it is challenging in so many ways. And it's just easy to kind of defer to the strength of the story that is the biblical salvation history that these things are often representing. And so for me, I try to find ways into it that are personal. I think it's a challenge to do with people who are not actors or who are not in school training to be actors, to want to get into these very personal details. And so I think that if anyone is wanting to pick up these kinds of plays and work on performing them and producing them, I would say start with your own kind of personal insight into the work and tie it into your own personal understanding of your belief in your faith, how you practice those things, how you understand them, and how do you manifest them in your everyday life. Because when you begin to put that forward, hopefully you can find ways to allow your collaborators, your actors, as well as designers and others, but mainly your actors, to find the confidence to be able to do the same thing. And from those points, you can begin to build on top of what faith does, how it makes its way into our everyday lives, and how we tie our identities to it. Those things you begin to build on top of that, such that you can find maybe symbols, you can find parallels, or you can find kind of recontextualizations. So kind of like what I was saying with the police procedural drama and the conspiracy, that fit for our modern world, and not only give us more access to this play and the dramatic effect that it's really trying to work to create, but also just make them relevant and give your actors new ways to engage with audiences. Because this is not drama that functions like the way that drama and theater function today. And I think that's really key to point out, that we can't just stage these like we would stage, Tennessee Williams or Harold Pinter or any number of playwrights that are modern.
Because you have to have an element of the scholarship behind you. We
do, and these aren't realistic. This isn't realistic work. Like there's nothing about this that is born out. Most acting. So I'm switching gears here from medieval to kind of acting and theater stuff. In our approach to acting today is largely based off of Konstantin Stanislavski and his work in creating what's called the system. Not the method. The method's based on the system, but it's a different thing. The system is very much this world in which every character is understood to be a real human being that has their own inner world. Sometimes we call it kind of the psychological drama, the sense of this internal force that is working within the individual to get them to say and do what they do in the play, that is born out of their own history and their own personal experiences with the world, that it is the actor's job to kind of investigate and to unlock, and in some cases fill in the details. But we are essentially kind of supplanting our own lives and our own understanding of ourselves for the sake of the character, and in some cases kind of connecting the two. That is not at all how actors in the medieval world would have approached their work. That wasn't understood in that regard. And I think that to tie it back to the conversation and what we were saying about imitation within monasteries in the early part of the Middle Ages, this idea of imitation and why we imitate and what we are imitating is really key. And so I think there's still work to be done. I'm trying to unpack a lot of that in my own scholarship and research, but it's certainly something that we need to kind of rethink and explore, and certainly be willing to push ourselves as theater creators and theater producers to move out of the world of kind of realistic or psychologically driven characters and find new ways to breathe life into things like allegory, allegorical characters, and the kind of surface level dialogue that we get from these plays, which is a challenge, but it requires some different techniques that are, that are still hard to find. But they're part of the work that we're doing for Toronto. We're actually several of us have been asked to speak to these techniques and these methods, so that we can kind of help relay to other people, like, hey, this is a different way to do drama. And it could be a really instructive way, particularly for students who love performance, but don't necessarily like modern acting technique.
So are you trying to get some continuity in the style across all of the plays? Because you're doing just 3 of the plays. Does everyone else have a similar understanding of what you're trying to achieve across the scope of the whole performances?
There are certainly some very overarching goals that we have with this that are very much a part of why Professor Sergi decided to produce this whole event. And those are largely tied to a sense of kind of the flow of these plays, the connectedness of the plays, how quickly they may have been done. Is it possible to even do all 40 some odd plays in 24 hours? That kind of thing. Can we do it within the reaches of daylight and dawn and dusk, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So certainly, trying to do that kind of research. But he's only given us a little bit of specifics in terms of parameters in our approach and our interpretation. One of which is that we do have to stick to the text. We can make some substitutions for words here and there where the meanings of those words or a phrase might be really opaque for modern audiences. There are obviously examples of anti-Semitism, the tonality as well as direct dialogue, and we want to do our best to remove that. Anti-Islamic bias as well. Yeah. So we want to try and kind of shift some of that away from it. But we are to stick to the text as much as possible. And then beyond that, it's really kind of it. It's what you feel like you need to do to make these plays alive. Now, he has said, like, let's not try to make them wholly modern. We don't want to necessarily, again, set like the conspiracy in a police precinct. But we want to defer to the medieval and give them that spirit and that flavor and that kind of sense of things. But all in all, it's very open as to how each group wants to approach the interpretation and performance of their plays.
And the other thing that the plays were particularly famous for was the amount of special effect that they managed to get into them. Floods and Hellmouth, we've already mentioned. Mm-hmm. Have you got any of that going on in your group?
Unfortunately, I think the most complicated aspect of ours is the kind of wall that is important for harrowing. This sense of separation between Christ entering into hell, into limbo, and the area that is controlled by Satan and his minions, which traditionally, if you've ever seen, there's a great image from these similar set of mystery plays from the French town of Valenciennes, which is at the very end of the. I think the manuscript actually comes from I want to say the very early 17th century or very late 16th century. And in it, there's this drawing, this excellent illustration of this large, long set with all the various kind of places that would represent the settings for this particularly for the life of Christ, but this larger kind of salvation story. The Hellmouth being on the very far end, obviously. But right before the Hellmouth is this large kind of stone keep with a gate, with a big kind of lifting gate for it. And that was where harrowing would have been performed. So very much in kind of the medieval sense, there was in the mind of the creators this idea that hell, or this part of hell, would have looked like this great medieval wall with a gate there that would be shut to people like Jesus, and that Satan and his retinue are there to kind of keep it secure and keep everybody in who's already in. So how we tear that wall down, how we make this big kind of like sense of the real, again, triumphant Christ coming in and doing this incredibly big dramatic effect. We're still working on that. I don't know that we've solved it. And again, we have other challenges as well. We have to move this play from Chicago to Toronto, so everything we make has to be able to be transported by bus. So everything from costumes to set pieces to all of it, as well as the people. The one good thing is that there are already wagons in Toronto, so we're going to be using the wagons that are already there. But we also have to be able to set this all up very quickly. we've been given a time constraint of about 5 minutes per setup. So, how we put together a big wall and how do we defend it and how do we make it work in the way we need it to work, but also give it that spectacle that it needs to have. We're still in that process. So, but it is one of those effects that we will need to have that really in the medieval world would have worked as kind of an awe moment, like, ooh, wow, applause and all that kind of stuff would have gone with it, certainly.
Wow, your designer has his work cut out for him.
Yes,
definitely. And I do have on my website, I do have a blog post about that illustration you're talking about from Valenciennes. So I will repoint everybody to that in the show notes as well, so everyone can have a look with what you've said in mind. And I think to finish with, you'd better tell us where and when. For people in the Toronto area, can they get to
Yes, if you're able to get to Toronto on June the 7th, I think I may have said 8th a moment ago, but it is Saturday, June the 7th. The actual beginning will start at 6 a.m. So it's a very early day, and it will go all the way until the plays are done, which is likely to be, as we've kind of timed it out as best we can, likely to be about midnight. So if you wish to be a part of it, it'll be a long day, but you can come and go as you want. It will be outdoors. Feel free to bring snacks, to bring food, to bring drinks with you. But it will be around the University of Toronto. So head to that area of the city of Toronto, and you will certainly see signs and directions about how to get to the plays. I don't exactly know where around the campus the different stations will be set. That's just a piece of information I don't know at this point. But there will certainly be a lot of information directing you as to where to go, if you can park or if you want to purchase it. I don't believe there are tickets. So I think this is a totally free thing for people to just walk in and out of. Yes. So if you have just a little bit of time on that Saturday, do come by and see us. And if we are experiencing inclement weather, we're going to push them back to the immediate Sunday following June the 8th. So it's going to be, we're targeting the 7th. May happen on the 8th, depending on weather.
Oh, well, we can live and hope it'll be sunblock that will be needed and not waterproofs.
Yes. We can send up some prayers for us. We could certainly use it.
My thanks to Carl for taking the time to talk to me, and a big break a leg to him and all of the performers and enablers involved in the Toronto performances. For more information on that, and especially if you are thinking of attending the plays on the 7th of June, please go to the website www.yorkplays.ca, where there is a lot of important information about the timing and location of the plays, what to bring, and what happens in the case of bad weather. I've put a link in the show notes, along with links to several of Kyle's other activities. If that leaves you wanting more on medieval theatre, then you can find the complete season on medieval theatre on the podcast feed as Season 3, that's episode 48 to 63. Next time, it's back to Shakespearean comedy and the return of Falstaff for a look at The Merry Wives of Windsor. In the meantime, if you've not done so already, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or Blue Sky to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help out with the costs of running the podcast, then please head on over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. I look forward to your company next time, but if you have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or through the website, where you can leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon, or you can write to me on the contact page. That's all at www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com.